The platform at Cedar Ridge Station stood empty now. 3 hours had passed since the Union Pacific from Laramie rolled in and rolled out again, and the dust it kicked up had long since settled on the pine boards. The sun hung low in the Wyoming sky, turning the clouds the color of an old copper penny, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote was warming up for the night ahead. Elias Tate stood at the far end of the platform where he had been standing for 3 hours. He was a tall man, 6'7" in his boots, and he was wearing the only black suit he owned. It was the suit he had worn to his wife's funeral in the winter of 1884. He had not expected to wear it again. He had not expected to need to. In his left hand, he held a bouquet of wild mountain flowers, Indian paintbrush, columbine, and a few late lupines he had climbed up to the ridge to pick that morning at first light. The flowers had started to wilt. The stems in his fist had gone soft with the sweat of his palm, and one of the paintbrush blooms had fallen off somewhere during the long hours of waiting. He had not noticed it fall. He had not noticed anything fall. Behind him, his two brothers leaned against the station rail, trying not to look at him. Jasper Tate was 33 years old, 6'6", with hair the color of chestnut oiled by the sun. He held his good hat in both hands and turned it slowly round and round, the way a man turns a prayer book when he has run out of things to pray for. Wyatt Tate, the youngest at 28, sat on the edge of the platform with his boots dangling over the rail tie, whittling at a piece of cedar with his pocket knife. He was not making anything. He was just whittling. "Maybe she changed her mind, Elias?" Wyatt said finally. His voice was softer than his size suggested. "City women do that. They get to the edge of something real and they turn back." 4 months of letters, Jasper muttered. 4 months of saving every coin for the train fare and the wedding clothes. Elias did not answer. He was looking east down the track, where the rails narrowed into a thin silver thread and vanished into the dusk. He had been looking there for so long that his eyes had stopped focusing. He was seeing nothing and everything at once. After a moment, he turned and walked to the trash barrel at the end of the platform. He lifted the wilted bouquet. He held it over the barrel for a long count of 3. Then he lowered his hand. He looked at the flowers. He looked at the barrel. And then, without saying a word, he tucked the bouquet inside his coat against his chest where the letters were. Jasper saw it. Wyatt saw it. Neither of them spoke. They were about to mount up and ride home in silence when the boy from the Western Union office came running up the platform steps, holding a yellow slip of paper in his hand. Mr. Tate, sir." The boy was breathless. "A wire. Come in not 10 minutes ago." Elias took the paper. His hand did not shake, but a muscle in his jaw moved once and did not move back. "Mr. Tate, I left the train at Laramie Station 4 days ago. There was trouble. I am walking. Do not come looking for me, as it is dangerous for you. I will arrive, forgive me. R. Ellery." He read it twice, then he read it a third time. "Laramie," Jasper said, reading over his shoulder. His face had gone the color of ash. "That is 160 miles, Elias. A woman walking alone on that road." "That road," Wyatt said quietly, "runs straight through Bighorn Valley." The brothers looked at each other, and the look said what none of them wanted to say out loud. Bighorn Valley was the kingdom of Silas Hargrove, and nothing safe ever happened to a stranger walking through Silas Hargrove's kingdom after sundown. Elias folded the telegram carefully. He tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat next to the wilted flowers, next to the 4 months of letters he had read so often. The ink had begun to fade at the folds. "We ride," he said. They did not even take time to change out of their wedding clothes. They did not take time to stop at the cafe and eat supper. They did not stop to tell Mrs. Agnes Whitaker back at the ranch that they would be late, and they did not stop to pick up anything more than what they carried on their horses already. Elias simply set his heels to his bay gelding, and the 3 Tate brothers thundered out of Cedar Ridge in the last rose-colored light of the evening, 3 giants of men riding 3 hard horses into country that had already eaten better men than they were. They rode through the night. By midnight, the moon had come up over the Bighorn foothills, a pale 3/4 moon that laid down just enough light to see the road by. By 2 in the morning, clouds had begun to stack up in the west, thick and dark, and a cold wind was coming down off the high country. By 4, the first fat drops of rain had begun to hit the brims of their hats. They had ridden 40 miles when Jasper, who was a tracker and could read the ground the way other men read a book, suddenly pulled his horse up hard. "Stop!" Elias reined in. Wyatt circled back. Jasper dismounted and went down on one knee beside the road. His hand traced something in the mud. He looked up, and in the gray first light of dawn, his face was grim. "Wagon tracks," he said, turning off the road heading west into the draw. "And here look, no horse prints pulling the wagon, no mule, just the wagon ruts going forward and boot prints on either side. A woman's boot prints. Small." Wyatt crouched beside him. "She is pulling it herself." 4 days, Jasper said. "The rain tonight has softened these prints, but the outer edges are still crusted. 3 days, maybe 4. She has been dragging that wagon since Laramie." Elias did not speak. He did not have words. He only nudged his bay forward into the draw, and Jasper and Wyatt mounted and followed. The rain came harder. The wind picked up. They rode into a narrow canyon where the walls rose on either side of them, and the sage gave way to stone, and half a mile in they came around a bend and stopped. She was there. Ruth Ellery was on her knees in the mud, and she was still trying to pull. A length of rough hemp rope was tied across her chest and under her arms. The rope had cut through the bodice of what had once been a white wedding dress, and it had cut through the cloth and into the skin beneath, and both of her shoulders were streaked with something dark that was part rain and part blood. Her blonde hair hung wet and heavy down her back. Her feet were bare and swollen. Her wedding dress, the one she had saved for in Philadelphia and carried across 1,500 miles of country, was torn at the hem and mud to the knees, and the white of it was no longer white at all. But she was still pulling. Behind her, the wagon had tipped onto a broken rear wheel. Inside the wagon, under a piece of canvas held up by a bent hoop, Elias could see the shape of an old woman lying still, a little boy sitting up with his arms around a smaller shape, and what looked like 3 ears of corn, and a strip of salt pork arranged in a pile, as if it were a treasure. Elias swung down from his horse. He did not draw his rifle. He did not draw his pistol. He could feel somewhere deep in the same place he had not felt anything from in 3 years, that this was not a moment for guns. He walked slowly and he took off his hat and he came around to the side of the woman and said, "Miss." Ruth could not lift her head. Her body had given everything it had and then given what it did not have after that, and there was nothing left. But she heard him. She heard the voice, and somehow from somewhere she found the strength to speak. "Mr. Tate," she said. Her voice was a cracked whisper. "Please forgive me. I have made you wait." Then her eyes rolled back, and she began to fall forward into the mud, and Elias caught her before she touched the ground. He caught her the way a soldier catches a fallen comrade on a field of battle. He lifted her up in both arms, and she weighed nothing, and the wet of her dress and her hair and her blood soaked through the sleeves of his black wedding suit, and he did not care. He looked down at her face in the gray rain light. She was young, softer than her photograph had been round her, with a face meant for smiling, though she was not smiling now. Her eyelashes were long and dark and stuck together with rain. There was mud on her cheek, and there was a thin line of dried blood at her temple. And even like this, even ruined, she was the most alive thing he had seen in 3 years. "Jasper," he said, and his voice was not his voice. "Check the wagon, now." Jasper moved. Wyatt was already moving. The boy in the wagon bed looked up at them with the flat, steady stare of a creature that had decided it would not be afraid anymore, because being afraid was not helping. He was 9 years old, and his face was dirty, and he had his arms around a little girl who looked about 5. "Son," Jasper said, gentle as he could, "I am Jasper Tate. That man there is my brother Elias. This one here is my brother Wyatt. We are friends of Miss Ellery. What is your name?" "Noah Hale, sir," the boy said. "And your sister, Elsie. And the lady in the back, my grandma. Her name is Evelyn. She is hurt in her leg, and it is going bad." Jasper drew back the canvas. He had learned field medicine from an army surgeon, who had stayed at his father's house for 6 months drinking himself slowly to death after the war. And before he died, he had taught the young Jasper Tate more than most medical schools taught in 2 years. Jasper knew a wound gone septic when he saw one. He drew the canvas back and he saw the old woman's leg, and he knew. "Elias," he said quiet, "we have got to move now." They moved. There was a hollow in the rocks, a quarter-mile on, where a seep of spring water ran out of the cliff and a natural overhang of stone made a kind of cave. It was not a home, but it was dry, and the wagon road went right past it. They got the wagon there. They got the old woman off the wagon bed and laid her on a bed of canvas on the dry stone floor. They got the children down and wrapped them in Wyatt's coat. They got Ruth laid beside Mrs. Evelyn, and they built a fire, and Jasper went to work. Elias knelt beside Ruth's head. He had pulled off his black coat and laid it over her like a blanket. He had his canteen in one hand and a strip of clean bandana cloth in the other, and he was dabbing the mud from her forehead the way a man cleans the forehead of a baby. He did not know why he was doing it. His hands were doing it on their own. Her eyes opened. They were the color of cornflower blue, and for a moment they did not focus. Then they did. They found his face. "Mr. Tate," she whispered. "Yes, Miss Ellery." "Are the children safe?" "The children are safe. And Mrs. Evelyn?" "My brother Jasper is working on her. He knows what he is doing." She closed her eyes. A tear ran out from under her lashes and down into her hair. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God, thank God." He said nothing. He simply dabbed her forehead with the cloth, and after a moment he laid his palm very gently against the side of her face, and she turned her head half an inch and pressed her cheek against his hand, the way a person does when they have been alone for too long and have finally stopped being alone. He did not move his hand away. Outside the cave, the rain drummed on the stone and the wind moaned through the canyon, and Wyatt Tate sat with little Elsie Hale curled against his chest and Noah Hale sitting upright and watchful at his side, and he hummed a hymn his mother had hummed before she died, bringing him into the world. By the time Jasper was done with Mrs. Evelyn's leg, the sun had come up behind the clouds and the rain had gentled to a drizzle, and Ruth was strong enough to sit up against a rolled saddle. She told them the rest then. She told them how 4 days earlier she had stepped off the train at Laramie Junction to fill her canteen at the station pump. She told how she had seen the station door and 2 men in long coats dragging an elderly woman down the platform by her arms, while a frightened young mother clutched 2 children and begged. She told how she had heard the name Hargrove spoken by the men in coats, and how she had watched the mother of the family press a folded paper into the old woman's hand and say, "Mama, if they take us, this is all we have." She told how she had walked up to the station master, how she had said, "Sir, I will pay for this family's fare wherever they need to go." How the station master had said there was no train out until the morning. How she had asked where the nearest livery was. How she had taken the $42 she had saved for wedding clothes and bought a wagon with a bad wheel and a thin mule, and had gotten the Hale family out of Laramie that same night. She told how the mule had died on the second day, how she had looked at the Hale children and at old Mrs. Evelyn, whose leg had already begun to fester, and how she had understood that if she stopped, they would die, and how she had therefore not stopped. She had taken the mule's harness, she said, and she had cut it down to fit a human body, and she had put the rope across her own shoulders, and she had pulled. 25 miles, she said, 3 days, rain on the second night, no sleep that she could remember. "Mr. Tate," she said when she had finished, and she looked up at him with eyes still wet and still steady, and her face was the face of a woman who expected to be sent away. "I know you waited for me at the station. I know your brothers waited. I know that I have arrived broken and muddy and with 4 strangers in my care, and this is not the bride you wrote to. I will not hold you to your offer. If you will only help me get these people to a doctor, I will find my own way from there. I did not mean to cost you anything. I only meant that I could not walk past." Elias did not speak. He could not at first. Then he reached inside his coat and he drew out the letters. 4 months of letters tied with a piece of grosgrain ribbon. He had kept them all. He laid them on his knee. "Miss Ellery," he said, "do you recall what you wrote in the first letter you sent me?" Her eyes were wet. "I do not, sir." "You wrote, 'I am not much gifted in any particular way, but I have never in my life abandoned anyone who needed me, and I do not intend to start.'" I remember now. Miss Ellery, my wife Hannah, when she was 19 years old, wrote a letter to a young soldier she had never met. It was a letter to a man on a frontier post in 1878. And in that letter she wrote, "I am not much gifted in any particular way, but I have never in my life abandoned anyone who needed me." Same words, Miss Ellery, word for word. I have those letters too. I kept them. Ruth stared at him. "When I read your letter," Elias said, "I thought it was Hannah speaking again, not speaking from beyond, speaking through. I took it as a sign that the Lord whom I had stopped speaking to for 3 years had not stopped speaking to me. And so I wrote you back, and I kept writing. And when you stepped off that train today, or when you did not, I was ready to go home, believing that maybe I had misread a sign. Maybe the Lord had not said what I thought he said. Maybe I was meant to go on being a stone." He reached out and took her hand. His hand swallowed hers entirely. "But Miss Ellery, you did not step off the train because you stopped for a family you did not know. You pulled a wagon for 3 days on your own back because you stopped. That is not a woman who misreads a sign. That is a woman who is the sign. So no, Miss Ellery, I will not be helping you find your own way from here. If you will still have a broken old soldier with too many graves behind him, you will be coming home with me. Because I have waited 4 months for a woman who does not abandon people, and I am not such a fool as to let her walk past now." Ruth began to cry. She cried without sound the way she had cried the last time her father had squeezed her hand before he died. Elias lifted her hand and pressed the back of it to his forehead and bowed his head over it, and for one long moment the cave was quiet, except for the crackling of the fire and the soft humming of Wyatt to the children and the steady working of Jasper's hands over the old woman's leg. It was Mrs. Evelyn who broke the silence. She had been drifting in and out of consciousness, but she came fully awake for one clear moment, and she turned her head on the rolled coat and she looked straight at Elias Tate. "Young man," she said. Her voice was paper thin, but it was steady. "Reach into the front of my dress, near the collar. There is something sewn into the lining. Fetch it out." Elias hesitated. Ruth nodded to him. "Go on, Mr. Tate," Mrs. Evelyn said. "I am a dying woman speaking to a living man. There is no impropriety and no time." Elias reached. His big hand found the stitching near her collar, and with his thumbnail he popped the thread, and from the lining of the old woman's dress he drew out a folded piece of paper. It was 8 sheets thick, folded over and over, wrapped in oilcloth and stained brown at one corner with what he hoped was only water. "Open it," she said. He opened it. He laid it out on the canvas beside her. It was a ledger, not a full one, a copy, written in a careful school teacher's hand in pencil with small notations in the margins. Name after name after name. Beside each name, a column of numbers. Beside those numbers, a second column. Beside that, a third. "Read the names, Mr. Tate," she whispered. He read them. Hale, Simmons, Dooley, Carver, Pritchard, Hamilton, Whitmore, Cooper. His finger stopped at the name Cooper. "Amos Cooper," he said quietly. "Amos Cooper." "Page 3, she said. "Your friend, I believe." "Mrs. Evelyn," Elias said. His voice had gone low and dangerous. "Amos Cooper rode with me at Little Bighorn. He saved my life on June the 26th in the year 1876, when a Sioux warrior came up behind me in the smoke, and Amos put a pistol ball through the man's shoulder at 20 feet of range. Amos Cooper died in 1883 in what the coroner called a riding accident. He fell from a horse he had been riding since he was 6 years old. His widow could not afford a headstone. She wrote to me once, and I rode down and put one up myself. I have always believed Amos did not die the way they said he died. He did not, Mrs. Evelyn said. 2 weeks before he died, he went into the Cedar Ridge Bank and he demanded to see the deposit slips on his account. There was $212 missing. He raised it at the town meeting that Sunday. On the following Thursday, he was dead. The entry for his account is on page 3, Mr. Tate. The second column is what he was shown. The third column is what he actually had. Mr. Hargrove keeps 2 books, has kept 2 books for 12 years. I copied the one behind the whiskey bottle in the bottom drawer of his desk on the night before I fell and opened my leg on that rock. I had 20 minutes. I got 31 families. The cave was very still. Elias Tate looked down at the paper on the canvas. He looked at the name Amos Cooper. He looked at the name Hale. He looked at 29 other names, half of which he knew personally, and the hand that held the paper began to tremble, not from fear but from something else entirely. "Jasper," he said. "I see it, brother," Jasper said from where he worked. "Wyatt." "I hear you, Elias." "Boys." Elias folded the paper back up very carefully, rewrapped it in its oilcloth, and held it in his fist. "We are not just riding a wounded family home. Do you understand what I am saying?" "We understand," Jasper said. "Hargrove did not send men after a poor family to collect a debt. He sent men after this paper. If he knows it exists, and he must know it exists by now, he will not stop. He will come for all of us. He will come for the Hale family, and he will come for Miss Ellery because she helped them, and now he will come for us because we are helping her." "Let him come," said Wyatt. And when Elias looked at his youngest brother, he saw that the boy who had sat on the platform whittling cedar was gone. In his place sat a man Elias had never quite seen before. "Let him come," Jasper echoed, and his hands never stopped moving over Mrs. Evelyn's leg. Elias looked down at Ruth. She was looking up at him, frightened but not flinching. She reached up and put her small, soft hand over his big, rough one where it held the paper. "Mr. Tate," she said, "I will go back to Philadelphia if my staying puts your family in danger. I swear to you I will. I did not come all this way to bring death to 3 good brothers." "Miss Ellery," he said, "you came all this way and pulled a wagon 25 miles to save a family you did not know. The Lord did not send you here to be sent back. The Lord sent you here. I will not undo what he has done." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she closed her eyes and she nodded once, and she said very softly, "Then I will stay." By midday, the rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds in long, dusty shafts, and Jasper had finished his work on Mrs. Evelyn's leg and pronounced that she would live if they could get her to a proper bed and proper food within a day. Wyatt had scouted the canyon and reported no riders following. They rigged a sling between 2 of the horses and laid the old woman in it, and they put the children in the wagon with a fresh axle cut from a cottonwood pole and a wheel from Wyatt's spare, and by 2 in the afternoon they were moving again north and west up into the foothills of the Bighorn Range toward home. Elias rode the big bay and held Ruth in front of him, sitting sideways across the saddle, her head against his shoulder. She slept for most of the ride. He did not let his arms slacken around her once, even when his shoulder began to burn from the old wound he had taken at Little Bighorn, the saber scar across his lower back that had never quite healed right, and that still ached when the weather turned. He welcomed the ache. He had not had someone to carry through pain in 3 years. They came up the long valley road at sunset, and the sight that met them was the sight that had met the Tate brothers every sunset of their lives. Mountains rising blue and purple to the north, pine forest climbing up the slopes, a wide meadow falling away to a creek, and at the head of the meadow on a low rise, a long 2-story log house with a stone chimney, at each end a barn and 3 outbuildings behind it, and a single oak tree older than the state of Wyoming itself standing at the eastern corner with 3 wooden crosses in its shade. The ranch house had been built by Colonel James Tate, late of the United States Cavalry, in the year 1868 when he came home from the Indian Wars with 3 small sons and buried his wife in the same ground she had died on trying to bring his youngest into the world. Colonel Tate had built the house himself, log by log. He had raised his 3 sons in that house, and when he had died in the spring of 1880, He had been buried under the oak beside his wife. 4 years later, Hannah Tate and little Samuel Tate had been buried beside them. 3 years after that, Elias Tate came riding up the valley road with a sleeping woman in his arms. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker was waiting on the porch. She was 65 years old, as tall as a fence post and thin as a rail, and she had been the housekeeper for the Tate family since the year Colonel Tate's wife died. She had been a mother to the three boys when they were small, and she was their closest thing to one still. She had heard the horses coming a quarter-mile down the valley. She had lit the lamps. She had water boiling on the stove, and she had pulled fresh sheets onto 3 beds, and she had made up stew enough for 6. She did not ask how she had known to do it. Jasper had ridden ahead an hour before and told her. She had known. He had known. She came down the porch steps as they rode up. She took one long look at the girl in Elias's arms. She took one look at the old woman in the sling. She took one look at the 2 small children in the wagon bed. And then she looked up at Elias Tate, her oldest boy, the boy she had not seen smile since 1884. And she said only, "Thank the Lord you came when you could. Bring them in." All of them. Now. And one by one they brought them in. Ruth was laid in the guest room that had been Hannah's sewing room. Mrs. Evelyn was laid in the big downstairs bedroom that had been Colonel Tate's. The children were bundled into the warm kitchen with bowls of stew and mugs of milk and blankets, and Elsie ate half of her stew and fell asleep with her spoon still in her hand, and Wyatt carried her up to the loft bed without waking her. Martha Hale, who had spoken barely 10 words all day, sat at the kitchen table and watched her children and began silently to weep. Jasper went straight to work over Mrs. Evelyn's leg again, this time with clean water and proper dressings and whiskey for fever. And Elias Tate, in a wet black suit with a wilted bouquet still pressed against his chest inside his coat, sat at the kitchen table across from Ruth Ellery, who was wrapped in one of Mrs. Agnes's dry shawls with her hair combed and her feet in a basin of warm water. And for a long time neither of them spoke. At last Ruth said, "Mr. Tate, I am not the bride you were waiting for." Elias looked at her. The firelight from the kitchen stove moved across her face, and the mud was gone now, and the small scratch at her temple was clean, and her eyes were very tired but very awake. "Miss Ellery," he said, "4 months ago I placed an advertisement in a Philadelphia newspaper. I did it, truth be told, not for myself. I did it for my brothers. Jasper lost a girl he loved in '82. Wyatt has never had a girl to lose. I told myself I had a wife once, and the Lord only gives a man one of those. I believe that. I believed it all the way up until today. What do you believe now?" He reached inside his coat. He drew out the bouquet. It was beyond saving now. 2 of the flowers had lost their petals. One was bent in half, but it was recognizable still, and the colors were still bright. He laid it on the table between them. "I picked these at first light this morning," he said. "I climbed the ridge behind the ranch with a lantern and picked them by starlight before the sun came up. They were the first flowers I have picked since '84. I picked them for a woman I had never met. I carried them to the station. When you did not come off the train, I went to throw them in the trash barrel, and I could not do it. I put them inside my coat instead, and I rode 100 miles looking for you, and when I found you, you were on your knees in the mud, still trying to save someone else. Miss Ellery, I do not know what I believe anymore, but I know that the Lord did not send me to that station today to come home empty-handed, and he did not send you to that train to arrive on time." Ruth reached out. She picked up the bouquet with both hands. She held it very gently. A petal fell off and settled on the table. "Mr. Tate," she said, "I am going to put these in water, and tomorrow I am going to press the best of them in a Bible, because I believe a woman ought to keep the first flowers a man ever picked for her, even if he picked them for a stranger. Miss Ellery, I did not pick them for a stranger." She looked up at him. "I picked them," he said, "for whoever was brave enough to get on a train and come all the way to Wyoming alone. Whoever that was not a stranger to me. She was the woman I had been writing letters to. You are her, Miss Ellery. You are the woman I was writing to." She looked down at the bouquet, then she looked back up at him. And for the first time since he had picked her up out of the mud, she smiled. It was a small smile. It was a tired smile. But it was a smile, and it went straight down into a place in Elias Tate that had been frozen for 3 winters running, and for the first time since the morning he had found Hannah and Samuel cold in their beds. Something in that frozen place began very quietly to crack. Far away in the valley below, beyond the meadow and the creek and the first ridge of pine, a single point of lamplight showed in the tall window of a great stone house, the house of Silas Hargrove. And in that lamplight, a tall man in a black broadcloth coat was reading a telegram that had just been handed to him by a rider whose horse was still lathered at the gate. The telegram read, "Three Tate brothers rode through Cedar Ridge at dusk, came out at dawn with the Ellery woman and the Hale family, taking them up to the ranch. Stop." Silas Hargrove read it twice. He folded it very precisely. He set it down on the desk beside a bottle of whiskey with the label half peeled. He looked out the window at the dark shape of the Bighorn Mountains in the distance, at the single warm yellow light of a faraway ranch house on a ridge 12 miles off. "Well, Colonel Tate," he said softly to no one as if speaking to a ghost, "it appears your sons have bought themselves into my business." He pulled a long, thin cord beside his desk. Somewhere in the house a bell rang. A door opened. Boots came down a hallway. "Mr. Rawls," said Silas Hargrove, not turning from the window, "saddle up the men. All of them. I want to know everything there is to know about what rode into the Tate Ranch tonight." And Mr. Rawls, "Sir, find out if the old woman is alive." The door closed. The Boots went back up the hallway. And in the great stone house in the valley, the lamp in the window burned very steady, and a man who had built a kingdom on 2 sets of books turned the pages of the first one while he thought about the second. Up at the Tate Ranch in the warm kitchen, Ruth Ellery placed the broken bouquet of mountain wildflowers in a glass of water on the windowsill. The glass caught the last firelight of the stove and threw it back as a small, bright point against the dark window pane. It looked from the valley below almost like a star. The first morning at the Tate Ranch came in soft and gray, the kind of Wyoming dawn that begins as a whisper of pale light on the eastern ridge and grows into something the color of fresh cream poured over the mountains. Ruth Ellery woke in a bed that was not her own, under a quilt that smelled of cedar and wood smoke, in a room that had once belonged to a woman she would never meet. For a long moment she did not remember where she was. Then she remembered everything. She lay very still, and she listened. Somewhere below her she could hear the soft clatter of a stove being stoked, the low murmur of a man's voice, the creak of a floorboard, the sound of coffee beans being ground in a hand mill, and further out through the wavy glass of the bedroom window, the distant complaint of cattle that wanted to be fed, and the clear, sharp cry of a red-tailed hawk riding the morning air above the meadow. Ruth pushed the quilt back. She was wearing a nightdress that was not hers. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker must have changed her in the night. Her hair had been brushed and plaited. There was a basin of fresh water on the washstand and a folded towel and a clean dress laid over the back of a chair. Not a new dress, a worn one. A woman's dress too small for Mrs. Agnes and too large in some places and too small in others for Ruth, but clean and mended and smelling faintly of the same sooter as the quilt. She understood what she was looking at. She was looking at one of Hannah Tate's dresses. Her eyes filled. She pressed the palm of her hand to her mouth and stood very still until the moment passed. Then she washed her face and she put on the dress of a dead woman as gently as a person would put on a sacrament, and she went down the stairs to find her place in the house. Mrs. Agnes was at the stove. Martha Hale was at the table folding a stack of clean rags for the doctoring. Noah was carrying in an armload of kindling. Little Elsie was sitting on the rag rug by the hearth with a wooden horse in her lap, the same wooden horse that Colonel James Tate had carved for his oldest son in 1853, a horse that had outlived the boy's mother and the boy's father and the boy's wife and the boy's own son. It had waited in a chest for another child to come. It was happy now. It did not know how to be otherwise. Mrs. Agnes turned from the stove and looked Ruth up and down. Well, she said, the dress fits better than I feared. Sit yourself, eat. And when you are done eating, we have a ranch to run, and I have been running it alone for too long. Ruth sat, she ate. She did not cry again until she was alone. Out in the barn, Elias Tate was saddling the big bay. Jasper had been up most of the night with Mrs. Evelyn's leg and was sleeping 2 hours before going back at her. Wyatt was in the tack room oiling every rifle and every pistol in the house, and he had laid them out in a row on the bench like soldiers on a parade ground, and he was going over each one with a prang and neat's foot oil and the close attention of a man who intends to use them. Elias came in, and Wyatt did not look up. Brother, Elias said, I hear you, Elias. We need to ride into Cedar Ridge today. I figured, not to show our faces, to see who is in town, to see whose horses are at Hargrove's store, to see if Sheriff Bartlett is wearing his star or his conscience. I want to count Wyatt. I want to know how many men Hargrove has on the ground. I will ride. Jasper stays. If anything comes up that valley road while we are gone, Jasper and the women hold the house. You and I will be back by dark. Yes, Elias. Elias stood a moment longer. He looked down at the row of oiled rifles and pistols. He looked at his youngest brother, who was 28 years old and had never killed a man, and who, by the look of his hands on that Winchester, had made up his mind in the night that he would if he had to. Wyatt, yes, if it comes to it, if shooting happens, you do not hesitate. You do not wait to see if a man is bluffing. You understand me? I have seen good men killed on a battlefield because they gave a bad man 1 second to think about it. Do not give any of Hargrove's men that second. Wyatt looked up at last. His eyes were clear. I understand, Elias. All right. Elias turned to leave, and then he stopped at the door and he said without turning, Wyatt, one more thing. Yes. Last night in the kitchen, that moment when you carried Elsie Hale up to bed, when you were humming to her. What of it? Mother used to hum that to us before she went. I had forgot until I heard you. Wyatt did not answer. He kept oiling the rifle. But after a long moment, he said very low, I was 6 weeks old when she went, Elias. I could not have heard her hum. No, Elias said, but you hum it anyway. He went out. The barn door closed behind him. Wyatt sat very still for a long count, and then he drew the back of his oil-stained hand across his eyes, once quick and rough, and went back to the rifle. That day, Elias and Wyatt rode into Cedar Ridge. They did not ride their usual horses, and they did not wear their usual coats. They went in quiet. They spent an hour in the general store run by Hargrove, buying flour and salt and nails like any two working men, and their eyes moved over every face in the place, and every face's eyes moved over them. At the freight office, the telegram clerk would not meet Elias's eye. At the livery, the stable boy who had known Elias since the boy was 10 years old whispered as he took their coins, Mr. Tate, sir, 5 men come in from Laramie yesterday. Hard men. They are staying at the back of the bank. Thank you, Billy. Mr. Tate. Yes. My daddy said to tell you, he said to tell you he has not forgotten the summer of '81. He said to tell you that when the time comes, he will ride. Elias looked at the boy for a long moment. You tell your daddy thank you, Billy, and you tell him to stay home. This one is on the Tates. They rode out. On the way home, they passed the small white church where Ruth and Elias would in time be married. The pastor, the Reverend Mr. Hammond, a man who had served as a chaplain with Elias's father at Shiloh, and who had buried Hannah and Samuel both, was sweeping the steps. He straightened when he saw them, and he lifted one hand and Elias lifted one hand back. No words passed. None were needed. By sundown, the brothers were home. And there in the dooryard was a sight that Elias Tate would remember to the end of his days. Ruth Ellery, in Hannah's blue calico dress, was standing at the pump. Her sleeves were rolled up. Her hair was up in a knot at the back of her head, with loose wisps curling damp around her face from honest work. She was drawing a bucket of water, and little Elsie Hale was standing on a crate beside her, holding the bucket steady with both small hands and laughing. actually laughing. A real child's laugh, the first Elias had heard in his dooryard since the summer of 1883. Ruth looked up, saw him, and her whole face changed. She smiled at him. Not the small, tired smile of the kitchen fire. A morning smile, a new smile, a smile that belonged already to this place. Elias sat his horse for a long count before he swung down because he did not trust his own voice. The next 13 days passed quickly and slowly the way the second half of a man's life begins to pass when he realizes it might still be a life worth counting. Mrs. Evelyn began to mend. Jasper's hands and Mrs. Agnes's broths did their work, and by the fifth day the old woman could sit up against pillows and take broth with a spoon. By the seventh she could speak for half an hour at a stretch without growing tired. By the 10th she asked for her reading glasses and a pencil, and she began to transcribe in a fresh hand on fresh paper everything she could remember about the Hargrove ledger that she had not had time to copy. She filled 6 pages. When Elias read them, he understood that what Mrs. Evelyn Hale had been in her younger life was a school teacher who had taught numbers to 2 generations of Cedar Ridge children, including Thomas Bartlett, the sheriff, when he was 9 years old. Martha Hale began to speak again, first in small sentences, then in longer ones. She asked if she could help in the kitchen, and Mrs. Agnes, who had been running the kitchen alone for 6 years, said, "Child, I thought you would never ask." The 2 women fell into a rhythm. Ruth joined them. Within a week, the kitchen of the Tate Ranch house sounded like a kitchen again, with 3 women's voices and 2 children's voices, and the clatter of pots and the smell of fresh bread. And Elias Tate, coming in from the barn at evening, would stand in the doorway sometimes for a full minute before anyone noticed him, because he could not quite believe what he was looking at. Noah Hale followed Wyatt everywhere. The boy did not speak much, but he watched everything. By the 4th day, Wyatt had put him on a gentle mare and begun to teach him to ride properly. By the 6th day, Noah could sit a trot. By the 9th day, he could canter. On the 10th day, Wyatt handed him very carefully a small rifle that had once belonged to Elias at the same age and said, "You are too young for this, but you are not too young for what is coming, so we will start." Elsie Hale attached herself to Ruth like a shadow. Everywhere Ruth went, Elsie went. When Ruth fed the chickens, Elsie fed the chickens. When Ruth kneaded bread, Elsie stood on a stool and punched her small fists into her own small lump of dough. When Ruth sat on the porch at twilight and read aloud from the family Bible, Elsie sat in her lap, and before the first week was out, the little girl had begun to call her Miss Ruth in a voice that was fast sliding towards something else. And Ruth. Ruth learned the ranch, she learned the cow, she learned the horses by name, she learned which chickens laid and which did not. She learned the smokehouse and the root cellar in the creek where the watercress grew. She learned the 3 graves under the oak tree, and on the 4th day she went out there alone with a handful of wild columbine and a stub of a candle, and she sat down in the grass. She did not know Elias was watching from the barn door. She laid the flowers on Hannah's grave first. "Hannah Tate," she said softly. "My name is Ruth Ellery. I am 22 years old. My father was a pastor. He died 2 years ago of the grip, and before that my mother died when I was 8. And I have been alone for most of my life. I came out here because I answered an advertisement in a Philadelphia paper. I came out to marry your husband." She paused. The wind moved the grass. She went on. "I want you to know that I am not here to take your place. I could not if I tried. He loves you still, Hannah. He loves you in a way that I think a woman only gets loved once in a lifetime, and I am not so proud or so foolish as to try to stand where you are standing. What I am asking, if I may ask, is only this. May I stand beside him? May I be the one who keeps the fire going while he rests? May I be the one who stitches his shirts and sets his supper and sits by his side when the nights are long? I will not ask for his heart. I know where his heart is, but I will be grateful for whatever room is left in the rest of him. And Hannah, if you will allow it, I will love your Elias the only way I know how to love anyone, which is fully and without asking to be loved back. I will think of you kindly every day that I am here. I swear it. She moved to the small grave beside Hannah's. Samuel Tate, little Sam, you were 4 years old when the Lord took you. I bring you this columbine because my daddy used to say columbine was the bravest flower on the mountain. And from the stories your father has told in his letters, you were a brave little boy. I promise you, Sam, if the Lord is good and gives your papa and me a little boy of our own, someday we will tell him about his brother Samuel. He will know you. You will not be forgotten. I swear it. And then the colonel's grave. Colonel James Tate, sir, I never met you, but I have met the 3 sons you raised. And sir, I will tell you something. You raised 3 men who ride 100 miles through a storm to find a stranger who might be in trouble. You raised 3 men who take in a dying woman and 2 orphan children and a ruined bride and say stay. You raised 3 men who will stand between a wicked man and what is right and will not flinch. Sir, wherever you are, I wanted you to know. The Lord gave you 3 good boys. They have not failed you. They have not failed a thing. She sat a long time after that. When she finally rose and turned to go back to the house, she stopped short. Elias Tate was standing 10 paces off. He had taken his hat off. His eyes were wet. His mouth was set in the particular way a man's mouth sets when he has been holding something back for a very long time and cannot hold it any longer. Ruth said nothing. She simply walked over to him, and she put both her hands around his big right hand, and she held it. Miss Ruth, he said. The name came out broken. I did not mean to listen. Mr. Tate. Yes, Miss Ruth. The truth is, I hoped you were listening. He looked down at her. The wind moved her honey-colored hair. The late sun was on her face. She was round and soft and tired and beautiful, and she was looking up at him with eyes that were saying the thing her mouth was too careful to say. He bent his head. He did not kiss her. He only pressed his forehead very gently against hers. He stood that way for a long count, and when he drew back, he brushed the pad of his thumb across her cheek one time, and he said, "Come on inside, Miss Ruth. It is getting cold." She went inside. He did not follow right away. He stood at his wife's grave for another 10 minutes, and what he said there, he said only to Hannah, and it was not overheard, and it is not for this telling. On the 15th morning, the men came. Ruth was at the pump when she heard them. 6 riders moving up the valley road at a walk. She counted them from habit, the way her father had taught her to count strangers approaching a parsonage. 6 horses, 6 men. The lead rider wore a tin star, and the second rider wore a long coat the color of dried blood. The 4 behind them wore what hard men wear when they ride as a group. She ran to the house. Elias! He was already moving. He had seen them himself from the barn loft window, where he had been keeping a lookout every morning since the week began. Jasper came in from the back. Wyatt came down from the loft with 2 rifles. Mrs. Agnes herded Elsie and Noah into the back pantry and shut the door behind them. Martha came to the front hall with a pistol in her hand that Mrs. Agnes had placed there the day before. Mrs. Evelyn in her bed whispered to Jasper, "Bring me my chair. I will not meet Silas Hargrove's men lying down." Jasper brought her chair. He helped her into it. He wheeled her to the parlor window. Elias walked out onto the porch alone. He did not draw his rifle. He only carried it. He stood at the top step, his boots planted, wide, his coat open, and he waited. The 6 riders stopped at the gate. They did not come through. "Morning, Mr. Tate," said the lead rider. His voice carried up the yard. It was a tired voice, a voice that did not want to be doing what it was doing. "Morning, Thomas," Elias said. He used the sheriff's first name on purpose. Sheriff Thomas Bartlett was 45 years old. He was a lean man with a long face and a gray-streaked mustache, and he wore his tin star at a particular angle that every man in the county recognized. His father, Josiah Bartlett, had been a sergeant in the Union Cavalry and had served under Colonel James Tate at the Battle of Gettysburg. Thomas Bartlett had grown up on stories of the colonel. He had stood at attention as a boy of 10 years old at the colonel's funeral 8 years ago, now holding his father's hand. Beside the sheriff on a black gelding with silverwork on the bridle sat Cletus Rawle. He was Hargrove's man. Everyone in the county knew it. He had a coiled bullwhip at his saddle horn and a sidearm on his hip, and a face that had never in any man's recollection smiled. "Mr. Tate," the sheriff said, "I am here in an official capacity. Mr. Hargrove has filed a formal complaint. He alleges that a widow named Martha Hale, her two minor children, and an elderly woman named Evelyn Hale, all of whom are under the legal guardianship of his estate on account of certain debts, have been unlawfully removed from that estate and are being harbored on this property." "Is that what he alleges, Thomas?" "It is what he alleges." "Have you got paper on that, Thomas?" The sheriff reached inside his coat. He drew out a folded sheet. He held it up. "Warrant for the arrest of Martha Hale, Noah Hale, and Elsie Hale. Warrant for the return of Evelyn Hale to the estate. Warrant for the search of this premises. All signed by Judge Wilcox of the Cedar Ridge Circuit Court." "Judge Wilcox," Elias said. "Yes, Mr. Tate." "Not Judge Miller." "No, Mr. Tate, not Judge Miller." Elias nodded slowly. He let the silence hold for a long count. "Thomas," he said, "do you remember what your father told you about paper signed by bought judges?" Sheriff Bartlett's jaw moved once. "He told me it was not paper. He told me it was kindling." "That is right. Now, this ranch was granted by federal patent to my father, Colonel James Tate, in the year 1871. That grant recognizes only the authority of federal judges for matters of search and seizure on this land. Judge Arthur Miller sits in the federal seat in Cheyenne City. If Mr. Hargrove wants my door opened, he gets paper from Judge Miller, not from Judge Wilcox. You know that, Thomas. Your father knew it, and I know it." Mr. Tate: "Yes, Thomas. You are putting me in a hard place." "No, Thomas. Silas Hargrove is putting you in a hard place. I am reminding you of who your father was." Cletus Rawls spoke for the first time. His voice was like a file drawn across rusted iron. "Sheriff, are you going to let this man stand between a lawfully issued warrant and lawful execution? Or are you going to do your job?" Sheriff Bartlett did not look at Rawl. He kept his eyes on Elias. "Mr. Tate." "Yes, Thomas." "Is the old woman alive?" "She is." "Is she being held against her will?" "She is not. Ask her yourself. Window to your left." The sheriff looked. Evelyn Hale was in her chair in the parlor window. She had combed her white hair. She was wearing a shawl, and on her lap was a pencil and a sheet of paper. She raised her hand. She did not wave. She simply held it up, palm out, so the sheriff could see. She mouthed one word at him through the glass: "Willing." Sheriff Bartlett looked at her for a long moment. He looked back at Elias. "Mr. Rawl," the sheriff said, still not looking at him. "What?" "This paper is not paper. It is kindling. I am not serving it today." Rawl made a sound in his throat that was not a word. "Sheriff, I will report this to Mr. Hargrove. I will report that you refused a lawful warrant. Mr. Rawl, you report whatever you please. And while you are at it, you may also report that I am wiring Judge Arthur Miller in Cheyenne City this afternoon to request federal review of Judge Wilcox's recent signings. Every one of them, going back 3 years." Rawl went white around the mouth. The 4 hard men behind him shifted in their saddles. One of them, a man with a scar across his upper lip, put his hand near his pistol butt. Elias's voice changed. It did not rise. It dropped. "Son." The man froze. "You move that hand 1 more inch, son, and my brother Wyatt puts a rifle ball through your shoulder from that loft window up there. I will not even have to ask him. He has been watching you through the sights for the last 2 minutes." The man looked up. He saw the dark shape of Wyatt Tate in the loft window. He saw the muzzle. He did not move his hand. "Slowly now," Elias said. "Rein hand only. Back your horse. Back him." The man backed his horse. "Mr. Rawls," Elias said, "you ride out with the sheriff. All of you. You ride back to your employer. You tell Silas Hargrove that he has lost his sheriff today. You tell him I am expecting company from Cheyenne by the end of the week. And you tell him, Mr. Rawl, that if he sends men up this valley again, they will be riding up for their own funerals. You tell him that word for word." Rawls stared at him. Mr. Tate, you have just declared war. No, Mr. Rawl. Silas Hargrove declared war in 1883 when he killed Amos Cooper. I am only now returning the fire. They rode out. Sheriff Bartlett turned his horse last. He looked up at Elias on the porch. He touched the brim of his hat. Mr. Tate. Yes, Thomas. My father used to say that every lawman meets one day where he finds out if he is a man or if he is a star. Today was mine. Tell Mrs. Whitaker I will be around for Sunday dinner when this is over. I will tell her, Thomas. And Mr. Tate. Yes. If they come back at you, you send a boy to my door. Any hour, I do not care. I will. He rode out. And Elias Tate stood on the porch a long time watching the 6 men ride back down the valley road. Jasper came out and stood beside him. Wyatt came down from the loft and stood on the other side. Behind them inside the house, Ruth came to the open doorway and put her hand against the frame, not stepping out, just standing there, watching the 3 tall brothers on the porch against the sky. At last, Elias turned to his brothers. Boys! Yes, brother, they said together. It is time. They knew what he meant. That evening after supper, Ruth found Elias on the porch alone. The lamps were low. The stars were coming out over the ridge. He was sitting on the bench with his arms resting on his knees and his hands clasped, looking out at the valley. She sat down beside him. She did not say anything for a long time. Finally, he said without looking at her, Miss Ruth. Yes, Mr. Tate. I cannot ask you what I am about to ask you. I have not the right. You came here as a bride. I had thought we had 4 months of writing between us. I had thought we would stand up in a church and speak vows before we spoke of harder things. But I do not think we have the time for 4 months of courting anymore. Mr. Tate, Miss Ruth Hargrove will come. He will not come tomorrow because he needs to gather his men. He will not come the day after because he needs to think. But he will come. Within the week he will come. And when he comes, he will come with 20 men, and he will come to burn this ranch to the ground and to silence every voice inside it. I know it, Mr. Tate. I'm going to send Jasper to Cheyenne tomorrow at first light. It is 180 miles hard ride. If any man alive can do it in 5 days, it is Jasper Tate. He will carry Mrs. Evelyn's papers to Judge Miller. He will bring back a federal marshal. Wyatt is going to ride out through the back country tonight to every farm between here and Laramie Fork, where a family lost money or a father or a brother to Hargrove. 14 names on Mrs. Evelyn's list. He will find them. He will gather their stories. He will bring them in as witnesses. And I, Miss Ruth, will hold this house with Mrs. Agnes and the women. I know it, Mr. Tate. That is not what I have to ask you. Ask me, Mr. Tate. He turned at last and looked at her. In the lamp light from the kitchen window, his face was younger than she had seen it, younger by years. Miss Ruth Ellery, I have been writing to you for 4 months. I did not know when I began that I was writing to the woman the Lord had been saving for me. I believed my life was over in '84. I believed wrong. I am 36 years old. I have buried a wife and a son and a father. I have more scars than I can name. I have a ranch and 2 brothers, and I have a war at my door, and I have nothing else in this world to offer you. But what I have, Miss Ruth, I am asking you to share. Not in 4 months. Not in a church next spring. Now, this week. Before the men come up that valley road again, I want to stand up in front of the Reverend Mr. Hammond and before God and before my brothers and my family and whatever friends we can gather, and I want you to be my wife. Not because we are afraid, because we are not. Ruth was very still. Mr. Tate, she said. Her voice was soft but steady. I answered your advertisement because I was alone in the world and because a cruel uncle was trying to sell me to a man of 58 years old who already had a wife in the grave. I got on that train because I had no better choice. I will not lie to you and say I came out here in love. I did not. I came out here in hope. And I want you to know that in these 13 days I have spent in your house, the hope I came out here with has turned into something I did not know I had room for. Miss Ruth. Mr. Tate, yes, Yes, I will marry you this week, before the men come, in the little white church, in Hannah's dress if Mrs. Agnes can take it in at the waist, because I am fuller than Hannah was, and I am not ashamed of it, and I think she would have liked to see her dress walk down an aisle one more time. Elias did something then that he had not done in front of another human being in 3 years and 5 months. He reached up with both hands and covered his face, and his shoulders shook once, and a sound came out of him that was half laugh and half the other thing, and Ruth slid closer to him on the bench and put her arm around his big shoulders and held him while he shook. Jasper left for Cheyenne City at first light the next morning with the copy of the ledger wrapped in oilcloth and strapped inside his shirt, 3 spare horses on a lead line, and a letter of introduction to Judge Arthur Miller, written in Mrs. Evelyn's steady school teacher hand. Wyatt rode out an hour later into the backcountry carrying Mrs. Evelyn's full list of 31 family names. He had his Winchester across his saddle and a notebook in his shirt pocket, and the full list of names folded into it, and Elias had told him at the gate, every name on that list that you can reach in 3 days, you reach. Not one more day than 3. If the farm is more than 40 miles off, skip it. We can get to them after. What we need right now is witnesses we can have in hand when the marshal comes. 14, 15. Anything you can put your hand to, but Wyatt. Yes, Elias. You come home before the men come up that valley. You hear me? You come home. I hear you, Elias. Wyatt rode out. Elias watched him until he was gone behind the first ridge. Then Elias turned back to the house and went to finish getting ready for his wedding. 3 days later, on a bright Saturday in August of 1886 in the little white church at Cedar Ridge, in front of a congregation of 27 people who had ridden in from every ridge and hollow, within a day's ride, Elias Tate married Ruth Ellery. Wyatt had come home at noon. He had ridden hard for 3 days. He had reached 14 farms. He had sat at the kitchen table of the widow Cooper in Eagle Rock and let the old woman weep on his shoulder for 10 minutes before she could speak. He had sat with the 3 grown sons of Obadiah Pritchard, who had been driven off his own land 3 years before over a debt that did not exist. He had sat with John Dooley, 61 years old, and he had listened to the old man tell him about a 16-year-old daughter that Cletus Rawle had hurt, and about $300 that Hargrove had forced Dooley to sign a silence paper for. Wyatt had listened to every one of them. He had written every name into his small notebook. At every gate, he had shaken the man's hand and asked the same question. If the federal court opens its doors in Cheyenne, will you come? 14 men and women had said yes. 14 handshakes, 14 names. The list was folded in a square in the inside pocket of Wyatt's good coat when he stood up as his brother's best man in the little white church. Jasper had already ridden for Cheyenne at dawn and would not make it back in time for the wedding, but he had pressed his harmonica into Ruth's hand the morning he left and said, "Play Amazing Grace at the supper tonight, sister, for me and for Lucinda." She would have liked to be at a Tate wedding. Sheriff Thomas Bartlett stood in the back of the church in a clean shirt, his star polished. Mrs. Agnes cried without stopping for the entire ceremony. Martha Hale held Elsie in her lap, and Elsie held a small fistful of wild columbine that she had picked herself that morning. And when Ruth walked down the aisle, the little girl whispered loud enough for 3 rows to hear, "She is so pretty." The Reverend Mr. Hammond, who had buried Hannah Tate and Samuel Tate and Colonel James Tate, spoke the vows in a voice that carried. When he came to the part where he said, "What God has joined together," his voice broke once and he had to stop, and the whole congregation waited for him, and nobody made a sound. Ruth wore Hannah's wedding dress taken in at the shoulders and let out at the waist, and she was beautiful. Elias wore the black suit he had worn to the station 3 weeks before, but this time there were fresh wildflowers in the buttonhole picked that morning by Noah Hale, who had taken on the duty of wildflower picker for the Tate Ranch in Jasper's absence. They were declared man and wife. Elias bent and kissed his bride one time gently on the lips in front of God and the congregation. Elsie Hale let out a small cheer. Noah Hale, more solemn, nodded once as if a thing he had been waiting for had finally happened. And that night at the Tate Ranch, there was a wedding supper. Roast beef and fresh bread and pie. Wyatt played the harmonica Jasper had left. Mrs. Agnes sang an old song that Colonel Tate had liked. Mrs. Evelyn, from her chair by the hearth, watched it all with her paper and pencil in her lap, smiling in a way that had nothing at all to do with numbers. At 9 in the evening, a single rifle shot rang out somewhere far down the valley. Then another. Then a third. 3 shots evenly spaced. The old frontier signal. "We know where you are. We are coming." Everyone in the house went still. Wyatt lowered the harmonica. Elias set down his coffee cup. Mrs. Evelyn's pencil stopped. Ruth at her new husband's side did not flinch. She only reached over, took his hand and squeezed it. Elias looked down at his wife. "Mrs. Tate," he said, "it appears our honeymoon will be a short one." "Mr. Tate?" "Yes, Mrs. Tate. I came too far on bleeding feet to give this up now. You go do what you have to do. I will hold the kitchen." He lifted her hand. He pressed it to his lips. One time, then he rose and walked to the gun rack on the wall, and he took down the rifle that had belonged to his father, and he turned to Wyatt and said, "Bar the doors, douse the lamps, tell Noah to take the loft, tell the women to stay low." 12 miles away on the ridge overlooking the valley, a tall man in a black broadcloth coat lowered a brass spyglass. Beside him, Cletus Rawle held the reins of 2 horses, and 20 armed riders waited in the dark below. Silas Hargrove closed the spyglass with a soft metallic click. "Mr. Rawle," he said, "Sir, tomorrow night, moonset, all of them, leave nothing standing, leave no witness breathing. And Mr. Rawle, one more thing. Sir, the old woman first." Rawle nodded. And in the dark above the Bighorn Valley, a cold wind rose out of the high country, and somewhere on a ranch house porch 12 miles away, a newly married woman named Ruth Tate stood in the open doorway with a kitchen lamp in her hand, and the light of it carried a long way down into the valley, steady as a star that refused to go out. The morning after the 3 rifle shots, the Tate Ranch did not look like a ranch preparing for a war. It looked like a ranch preparing for a long day of ordinary work. Ruth Tate set the bread to rise at 4 in the morning before the sun had even begun to think about lifting itself over the Bighorn Ridge. Mrs. Agnes Whitaker was at the stove by 4:15. By 5, the coffee was on and the kitchen was warm, and the men came in from the barn with their hats in their hands, because that was what men did in Colonel James Tate's house and had always done, war or no war. But under the ordinariness of it, every hand in that house knew what was coming. Elias stood at the head of the kitchen table. He did not sit. He looked around at the faces. Wyatt, Mrs. Agnes, Martha Hale with her hands folded, Mrs. Evelyn in her wheelchair with her notebook in her lap, Noah standing at his grandmother's shoulder, Elsie perched on the bench beside her mother holding the wooden horse, Ruth at the end of the table across from her husband, wearing a plain gray work dress, now her hair braided tight for the day ahead. "We cannot run," Elias said. "Mrs. Evelyn's leg will not take a hard ride. The children will not keep up. If we scatter into the hills, we will be picked off one at a time. Hargrove wants us scattered. We will not oblige him." "We hold the house," Wyatt said. "We hold the house. For how long we do not know. Jasper left yesterday before first light. If he rides the way I believe he will ride, he reaches Cheyenne tonight. Judge Miller will move fast. Marshal Nathaniel Cross, if he can be raised at Denver, will ride out with men the moment the wire reaches him. Best case, we see help in 4 days. Worst case, 6. "And the attack?" Martha Hale asked softly. "Tonight. Tomorrow night at the latest. Hargrove will not wait a week. He knows the wire has been sent. He knows Jasper is on the road. Every hour Jasper stays alive is an hour Hargrove loses. He will come fast." He looked at Ruth. "Mrs. Tate." "Yes, Mr. Tate. You and Martha will load for Wyatt and for me. Mrs. Agnes takes the kitchen window with the sharps. She has shot that rifle for 40 years and she will not miss. Mrs. Evelyn takes the parlor window with the pistol. Noah takes the loft with the smaller Winchester. Elsie stays under the kitchen table with the wooden horse, and she does not come out until I come for her, no matter what she hears. Do you understand me, little one? Elsie looked up. Her eyes were huge. She nodded once. Say it, child, Mrs. Agnes said gently. I stay under the table, Elsie whispered, until Mr. Elias comes for me. Good girl. They set the house that day the way old Colonel Tate had taught his boys to set a fighting position. Flour sacks doubled up against the inside of the front window walls, packed tight to stop a bullet that came through the glass. Buckets of water in every room so a fire started by a thrown torch could be doused in the first 10 seconds. The back door nailed shut and braced with 2 cross beams. All 3 staircases measured and timed. Every rifle in the house cleaned and laid out. Every cartridge box open. The smokehouse emptied of meat and dragged to the porch to make an extra wall of chest-high cover. The well covered with planks so no burning arrow could foul it. By sundown, the house was ready. Ruth found Elias at the oak tree at dusk. He was kneeling between the 3 graves. He had a fresh handful of columbine on Samuel's grave. He was speaking to them too low for her to hear. She stood at a respectful distance and waited. When he rose, he turned and saw her, and he did not start. He had known she was there. Mrs. Tate, Mr. Tate. He walked over to her. The last light was going out of the west. The first stars were coming up over the ridge. He looked at his wife of one day, and he took her hand. Ruth, he said, yes. If tonight goes bad, if one of us is to fall, I want you to know something. Mr. Tate, do not. Hush now. I am saying it. I want you to know that whatever happens tonight, I have already been given more than I thought I could be given. 3 weeks ago, I was a dead man walking my own land. You found me. The Lord used you to find me. I did not know I was findable. Whatever comes tonight, you have to know that already by God's grace I have been saved. Ruth reached up. She laid her palm against his face, against the stubble, and the old scar at his brow and the skin at his temple where the first gray was coming in. Mr. Tate? Yes, Ruth. I am not leaving this ranch a widow. Not tonight. Not ever. Do you hear me? You made a vow yesterday, and so did I. The Lord does not give one day of marriage and call it a life. So you listen to me, Elias Tate. You will live through this night. You will fight through it, and you will come out of it, and you will come home to me. Do you hear me? I hear you, Mrs. Tate. Say it back to me. I will come home to you. She went up on her toes. He bent his head. And in the last gray light of that Wyoming evening, under the oak tree where 3 Tates were buried, Elias and Ruth kissed one time, slow and full and steady. It was the kiss of a goodbye and the kiss of a promise, and there was not an inch of daylight between the 2 of them for the length of it. Then they walked back to the house together, hand in hand, to wait for the men to come. They came at 2 in the morning. Sheriff Thomas Bartlett came first at a hard gallop alone, his horse lathered and his coat dark with blood at the shoulder. He made it as far as the front porch before he fell off his horse and onto the boards. Wyatt and Elias dragged him inside. Mrs. Agnes went to work on his shoulder while he talked. 20 men, Bartlett said through gritted teeth, hired out of Texas and Kansas, paid in gold, rawl at their head. Hargrove himself is on the ridge south of the creek watching with a spyglass. I tried to stop them at the junction with 6 of my own. They shot down 3 of my deputies and put a ball in me. I rode. They are coming up the valley now. They will be here inside the hour. Thomas, Elias said, you done good. You hold that shoulder. You stay in this kitchen. You do not die on Mrs. Agnes, you hear me? Mr. Tate? Yes, Thomas. My father rode with your father. Tonight I ride with you, if I can get up. You do not need to get up, Thomas. You already rode. You brought us the warning. That is enough. Elias straightened. He looked at his family, at his wife. Positions. They took their positions. At 2:17, the first shot was fired from the tree line at the eastern edge of the meadow. The ball punched through the kitchen window and buried itself in the opposite wall, missing Mrs. Agnes by 6 inches. Mrs. Agnes did not duck. She shouldered the sharp, sighted along the muzzle flash, and fired one careful shot in return. Far across the meadow, a man fell out of a tree and did not move. "That is one," Mrs. Agnes said and began to reload. The night split open. For the next hour and a half, the Tate Ranch house was the loudest place in Wyoming territory. Elias fought from the front parlor, his rifle barking at every shadow that crossed the open yard. Wyatt fought from the dining room covering the west side. Mrs. Agnes held the kitchen, and every man who tried to cross the line between the barn and the house had to pass in front of her sharps, and not one of them made it past. Noah in the loft fired his small Winchester from the north gable window and drove back 2 men who were trying to climb onto the roof from the water trough. Mrs. Evelyn in the parlor fired her pistol 3 times through the front window at men attempting to reach the porch with torches, and she did not miss any of the 3 shots. Martha Hale loaded as fast as her hands could move, passing loaded rifles forward and receiving empty ones back. Ruth Tate moved between the rooms with water and ammunition and did not once duck, even when the ball struck the log walls inches from her. By 3:30, half of Hargrove's men were down. The rest had pulled back to the tree line to regroup. There was a lull of perhaps 10 minutes, and in that lull, Elias made his count. They had held. Wyatt had taken a graze along his left forearm. Elias had taken a splinter of wood in the cheek when a ball had shattered a window frame. Mrs. Agnes was untouched. Mrs. Evelyn was untouched. The children were untouched. Sheriff Bartlett was unconscious but breathing. Ruth was unharmed. "They will come again," Elias said. "Harder this time. They will try the roof." Noah. "Yes, Mr. Tate," came the small voice from the loft. "You watch that north window. Anything moves on the roof, you do not ask, you fire." "Yes, sir." They came again at 3:40. It was worse. 8 men this time in a coordinated rush from 3 sides covering fire from the tree line, while 3 of their best tried to put the house between them and Mrs. Agnes and come at it from the blind side. One of them almost made it. Cletus Rawl was the best of Hargrove's killers. He had been a manhunter in the Texas brush country for a dozen years before Hargrove bought him. He knew how to move silent, and he knew how to move in the dark, and he came around the northwest corner of the house under covering fire, and he found what he had been looking for. The trellis up the side of the root cellar addition. He climbed it in 20 seconds. He rolled onto the roof. He crawled across the shakes toward the north gable window, and he pushed the window open, and he dropped into the loft. Noah was facing the other way. Noah heard the boot hit the floor. He turned. He saw Cletus Rawl in the loft with him. He saw the pistol coming up. He froze. He was 9 years old. He had never seen death come for him personally. His hands forgot the rifle. Rawl smiled. "Boy," he said softly, "you just hand me that rifle and you get to see another sunrise. Simple as that." Noah could not move. "Boy, hand it over." Noah did not hand it over. He could not. He could not do anything. Rawl lifted the pistol. He thumbed back the hammer, and Wyatt Tate, who had heard the boot hit the floor from the dining room below, who had been running across the main room and up the loft stairs for the last 4 seconds, came through the loft opening at a dead sprint. There was no time to aim. There was no time to think. Wyatt Tate did what Wyatt Tate had always done, which was to move without hesitating, and he threw himself between the pistol and the boy. 2 shots rang out so close together they sounded like one. Cletus Rawl's shot went into Wyatt's chest on the left side just below the collarbone. Wyatt's shot, fired one-handed as he was already falling, went into Cletus Rawl's forehead and came out the back of his skull and buried itself in the rafter behind him. Rawl was dead before he hit the floor. Wyatt went down onto his knees, then onto his side. Noah screamed. It was the first sound the boy had made all night. It was a scream that brought Elias running up the loft stairs 3 at a time, rifle forgotten, his big hands reaching for his youngest brother before he had even seen him. "Wyatt! Wyatt! Wyatt!" Elias dropped to his knees beside him. He lifted Wyatt's head into his lap. Blood was already soaking through the front of Wyatt's shirt. His face was gray, but his eyes were open and they found Elias and they focused. Elias. Right here, brother. I got you. Wyatt, hold on. Wyatt, hold on. Mrs. Agnes, get up here. Elias. Save it, Wyatt. Save it. Help is coming. Did I? His breath was short. Did I get him? The man. You got him, Wyatt, clean through the head. Noah is safe. A small smile moved across Wyatt's lips. The dimples showed faint one more time. Good, he whispered. Good. I was scared I would not get there in time. You got there, brother. You got there. Noah was sobbing. He had crawled over. He had Wyatt's hand in both of his own small hands, and he was holding it like he could keep a life in a body by the grip of his fingers. Mr. Wyatt, please. Wyatt turned his head a little. His eyes found the boy's eyes. Son. Yes, sir. You were brave tonight. Braver than I was at your age. Do not ever let anybody tell you different. Yes, sir. Look after that little sister. You hear? Yes, sir. Wyatt looked back at Elias. Elias, right here. Tell Jasper. Tell him I was not scared. Tell him. He took a breath that did not seem to want to come. Tell him I saw Ma and Pa. They were waiting. They said they had been waiting a long time. Wyatt, tell Ruth, tell her thank you. He smiled again, very faint. Tell her thank you for my brother. She gave him back to me before I went. Wyatt, stay with me. Elias, yes, I was not scared. The list, Elias, the list of names, inside pocket of my coat. You get it to Jasper. You hear me. You promise me that. I promise, Wyatt. Good. Wyatt Tate closed his eyes at 4:11 in the morning on the 6th of August, 1886, in the loft of the house his father had built, in the arms of the brother who had raised him. He did not open them again. Noah Hale laid his forehead against Wyatt's still hand and wept the kind of weeping a child only does once in a life. Elias Tate held his youngest brother and did not make a sound, but the tears came down his face and fell onto Wyatt's shirt and mixed with the blood there. And Mrs. Agnes, who had come up the stairs at last, stopped at the top step and clapped her hand over her mouth and did not come any further. Downstairs, the fight was still going on. Elias stood up. Before he did anything else, he reached into the inside pocket of Wyatt's coat and he took out the folded list of 14 names and he placed it inside his own shirt against his chest. He left Wyatt with Mrs. Agnes and with Noah. He took Cletus Rawls' pistol off the floor and stuck it in his belt. He took his rifle back up. He went down the stairs. In the parlor, Ruth met him. She saw his face. She did not ask. She only held out a freshly loaded rifle to him, and he took it, and their hands touched for 1 second, and her eyes said everything. He fought the rest of that fight in a silence that the surviving Hargrove men would later describe to any man who would listen as the worst thing they had seen in the war that night. Elias Tate did not shout. He did not curse. He did not waste a cartridge. He moved from window to window in the downstairs room, and he fired, and he moved again, and he fired, and he moved again. And by 4:45, there were no men left standing in the yard, and the remaining 6 Hargrove riders were running for the tree line as hard as their horses could run. Silas Hargrove on the ridge to the south watched them run. He lowered his spyglass. Well, he said to no one at all, it appears we have misjudged the Tate boys. He turned his horse. He did not finish the thought he had started. At 8 in the morning, just after sunrise, the sound that rose in the south was a sound that every person in the Tate Ranch house had been praying for since 3 in the afternoon the day before. It was the sound of 30 horses coming up the valley road at a hard trot. Jasper Tate rode at the head of them. He had ridden 180 miles in 3 days and 2 nights, had changed horses 4 times, had not slept more than 40 minutes at any stretch. And he rode into the yard of his father's house on a borrowed chestnut with his hat hanging around his neck by the chin strap and his face hollowed by exhaustion. Behind him rode United States Marshal Nathaniel Cross of Denver, 50 years old, and built like a fire hydrant with eyes like blue steel and a reputation for never letting a warrant go unfilled once he carried it out of his office. Behind Marshal Cross rode 25 armed deputies. Behind them rode Federal Judge Arthur Miller himself, 68 years old, a veteran of the Union Army who had refused to stay in Cheyenne when he heard the story Jasper Tate brought into his parlor at midnight 3 nights before. They rode into the yard. They saw the bodies. They saw the shattered windows and the scorched porch. They saw Elias Tate standing in his own doorway with his rifle still in his hand and blood on his shirt that was not his. And they saw the look on his face, and they knew before anyone spoke that one of the dead in that house was not one of Hargrove's. Jasper swung down. He walked to his brother. He did not ask. "Wyatt," Elias said. It was the only word he could get out. Jasper's face did not change, but something in his eyes went a very long way away and then came back. "Where?" "Loft." Jasper went up. He was up there for a long time. When he came down, his eyes were red, but his jaw was set. Elias met him at the foot of the stairs and took out the folded list of 14 names from inside his shirt and pressed it into his brother's hand. "He got these in 3 days," Elias said. "He rode all the way out to Eagle Rock. 14 people. He asked every one of them if they would come to Cheyenne when the court opened. Every one of them said yes. He brought the list home the morning of the wedding. I took it off his coat upstairs." Jasper closed his fist around the list. He looked down at it a long moment. "Then I will fetch them, Elias. I will ride every one of those 14 farms myself. I will tell every one of them what my brother did last night. I will bring them in." "All right, Jasper. But first," "Yes." Jasper looked out at the yard where Marshal Cross and the deputies were dismounting. "First we go take Silas Hargrove." Marshal Cross looked at him. "Son, I will ride with you anywhere you want to go, but you have not slept in 3 days. I will sleep when Hargrove is in a cell." "All right then." They rode. Silas Hargrove was arrested in his own library at 9:15 that morning. He was wearing a dressing gown over his suit and drinking coffee from a china cup when Marshal Nathaniel Cross walked through his front door with Jasper Tate one step behind him and 18 deputies filling the hall. He did not run. He did not fight. He set the china cup down very carefully on its saucer and looked up, and the only thing he said was, "Well." He was taken away in irons. In the fire of his study, the deputies found 3 half-burned ledger pages. Hargrove had been trying when the marshals arrived to finish destroying his records. He had not finished. Enough remained to match line for line the copy Mrs. Evelyn Hale had made in 20 minutes behind his back on a summer night the month before. Wyatt Tate was buried the next morning under the oak tree beside his father and his mother and his sister-in-law and his nephew. The Reverend Mr. Hammond read the service. Most of Cedar Ridge came. Sheriff Bartlett came on crutches. Mrs. Evelyn came in her wheelchair. Noah Hale played the harmonica that Jasper had handed him at the graveside with shaking hands. He played Amazing Grace. He did not miss a note, but at the last line he could not finish, and Ruth Tate, standing with Elias's arm around her, finished the line by singing it soft and clear for the boy. Then Jasper Tate rode out again with a list of 14 names in his pocket to fetch his brother's witnesses. The trial was held in Cheyenne City in the federal courtroom presided over by Judge Arthur Miller. It lasted 3 weeks. Mrs. Evelyn Hale was the first witness called. She was wheeled into the courtroom in her chair wearing the one black dress she owned, her white hair combed and pinned. She held the 8-page copy in her lap. She swore her oath on the family Bible her husband had carried through the war. Then she began to read. She read for 3 hours. She named 31 families. She named each number. She explained for each entry what the true balance had been and what the false balance had been shown to be. She explained how the signatures in the margins of the false book had been forged, and she explained how she knew because she had been a schoolteacher in Cedar Ridge for 22 years and she had taught half of those signatures their letters when they were children. She did not rush. She did not pause. When she came to the entry for Amos Cooper, she stopped and she looked up at the gallery and she said, Mr. Cooper was murdered for the difference between column 2 and column 3 on page 3. I want the record to show that. He was murdered for $212. Then she resumed writing. When she finished, Judge Miller rose from his bench and he bowed to her, a federal judge in a federal courtroom bowing to a 68-year-old widow in a wheelchair, and the whole courtroom rose with him. Elias Tate was the second witness. He wore his black suit. He was asked about Amos Cooper. He told the story of the ride at Little Bighorn on June 26, 1876. He told how Amos Cooper had saved his life. He told about the bank visit in the spring of 1883. He told about the town meeting. He told about the funeral he had paid for. He named the men in Hargrove's employ who had been seen near Amos Cooper's horse trail on the morning of his death. He named them one by one, and as he named them, Marshall Cross took notes, and Judge Miller took notes, and Silas Hargrove at the defense table did not look up. Sheriff Thomas Bartlett testified next. His arm was in a sling. He told about 12 years of small compromises. He told about the warrants he had served that he should not have served. He told about the warrants he had refused to serve. He named Judge Wilcox. He named Cletus Rawle. He named every deputy he had suspected of taking money. When he finished, he took off his tin star and laid it on the witness stand. Your Honor, he said, I understand I may face charges for my own failures. I am prepared to face them. Sheriff Bartlett, Judge Miller said, you rode up the Tate Valley with a bullet in your shoulder to warn those people. You delivered the warning. You lost 3 of your own men doing it. Put the star back on, son. Your father would want it on. We will talk later about what comes next. Sheriff Bartlett pinned the star back on. His hands shook. Then the 14 witnesses began to come forward. They were the 14 names Wyatt Tate had gathered in the last 3 days of his life. Jasper had taken the list from his brother's pocket before the burial, and when Jasper had ridden out again 2 days after the funeral, he had gone to every one of the 14 farms. He had knocked on every door himself. He had told them, man to man and widow to widow, what his brother had done in the loft of the Tate Ranch house in the last hour before dawn. He had told them that his brother's last words to anyone who was not family had been about the list of names folded in his coat. And Jasper had asked each of them the same question Wyatt had asked 3 weeks before. Every one of them had answered yes. When the first of them was called to the witness stand, a white-haired widow named Nellie Cooper, who was the wife of Amos Cooper. Jasper Tate stood up in the gallery and walked her to the front of the courtroom himself, and he introduced her to Marshall Cross with a sentence that would come to be the sentence he used for every one of the 14. This is a witness my brother Wyatt Tate brought in before he died. The courtroom was silent for that sentence. It was silent again when he said it for the second witness. By the 5th, Judge Miller had begun to nod once, very slow, every time Jasper said it. By the 10th, Judge Miller had stopped striking his gavel when the witness was sworn. He simply inclined his head, and the witness took the stand, and the witness told their piece. By the 14th, Silas Hargrove at the defense table had put both of his hands flat on the tabletop and was looking at his own hands and was not looking up for any reason. Each witness told a story. A widow who had been swindled out of her husband's pension. A farmer who had been forced off land his grandfather had broken. A father who had signed a silence paper for $300 rather than tell what Cletus Rawle had done to his 16-year-old daughter. A son whose father had raised the same question Amos Cooper had raised at a town meeting and who had died in the same kind of accident 2 months later. 14 stories, 14 corroborations of Mrs. Evelyn's ledger. On the 22nd day of the trial, Silas Hargrove was found guilty on 14 counts of fraud, 3 counts of conspiracy, 2 counts of murder in the first degree, and 1 count of organizing an armed assault against a federal land patent holder. He was sentenced to 40 years in the federal penitentiary at Leavenworth. He was 56 years old. He would not walk out alive, and every man and woman in the courtroom knew it. His fortune was seized. Judge Miller ordered it distributed under federal oversight back to the 31 families listed in Mrs. Evelyn's copy. The Cooper family received the full $212 that had been taken from Amos, plus 5 years of back wages, plus a headstone upgrade for the grave Elias had bought him 7 years earlier. The Hale family received the 2 years of wages that Martha had never been paid, plus the appraised value of their stolen wagon, plus a sum designated as compensation for pain and suffering of a widow and her children. Judge Wilcox was arraigned 2 weeks later on charges of judicial corruption. He did not stand trial. He was found in his study at home with a pistol in his hand before his bailiff arrived to serve him. It was in late September, 6 weeks after the trial ended, that the letter arrived at the Tate Ranch. It came in an envelope addressed to Ruth Tate in a hand she did not recognize. Inside was a cover letter from a law office in Cheyenne City. Mrs. Tate, enclosed you will find a sealed letter that was placed in my safekeeping in February of this year by Mr. Wyatt Tate of Cedar Ridge, Wyoming. His instructions were that in the event of his death, this letter was to be delivered to his brother's wife, if he had one at the time of his death, and if not, to the brother himself. As Mr. Tate fell, I understand, on the 6th of August in defense of his family, and as his brother did take a wife the day before these instructions now fall upon me to execute, I extend my deepest condolences to your family. Respectfully, Josiah Pike, Attorney at Law. Ruth sat down on the porch step with the sealed letter in her lap. Her hand shook. Elias came out from the barn. He saw her face. He sat down beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Wyatt Tate's looping, slightly childish hand, written on a single sheet of Tate Ranch stationery. Dear sister, if you are reading this, I have gone on. Do not grieve too hard. I lived a fine life. I had 2 brothers who loved me. I had a father who raised me in a good house. I had a mother I did not know but whom I hummed to anyway. I had mountains, which are a fine thing to have. And at the end I had you and the Hale family, and that was more than I ever hoped to have, so please do not grieve. Sister, I need you to know something. From the day you walked into this house, I have prayed every night that you would choose Elias, not Jasper, not me. Elias. Because my oldest brother died inside in the winter of '84, Ruth. I saw it happen. I watched a living man become a stone in the space of a single night, and I watched him stay a stone for 3 years, and there was not one thing that me or Jasper or Mrs. Agnes or the Reverend Hammond could do to bring him back. Not one thing. You brought him back, Ruth. You did not even try. You just sat across a kitchen table from him, and you smiled at him one time, and the stone cracked, and my brother started breathing again. I have been thanking God for you every night since the first night you stayed in this house. So thank you, sister, for bringing back my brother, for the first sister I ever had. I had no sister before you, and I am sorry we only had a few weeks of me being your brother. But they were good weeks. Please remember me to any children you may have. Tell them their Uncle Wyatt laughed a lot and loved more than he was loved back and went home to his people on a good day defending a good house. That is all you need to tell them. I leave my share of the ranch to Jasper with the hope that he will one day find a girl and start calling Mrs. Agnes grandmother. I leave my savings, $1,840, to the building of a school in Cedar Ridge because I never did learn to read as well as I should have, and I would like the children who come up after me to have a better crack at it than I got. I leave my harmonica to Noah Hale. He has a good ear. He will figure it out. I leave my pistol to Elsie Hale. When she is of an age, teach her to shoot it. The world being what it is, a woman should be able to defend herself, and I leave my love. What of it is left behind to my brothers, to Mrs. Agnes, to the Hale family, and to you, Ruth, to you especially, sister. Take care of him, your brother Wyatt Tate. Ruth finished the letter. She laid it in her lap. She was not crying. She was past crying. She was somewhere else. Elias took the letter from her hands. He read it. He read it again. When he finished, he folded it, and he pressed his face against the top of Ruth's head, and he stayed that way for a long time without speaking. Finally, Ruth said, Elias. Yes, Ruth. If we have a son, we will name him Wyatt. Yes, Ruth. If we have a daughter. Yes, Ruth. We will name her Hannah. Elias did not answer for a long moment. When he did, his voice was thick. Yes, Ruth, we will name her Hannah. The winter passed. It was a hard Wyoming winter, but no winter was ever hard again, the way the winter of '83 had been hard. There was bread on the table and fire in the stove and voices in the house, and when the snow got too deep to work, Elias taught Noah to play chess at the kitchen table, while Ruth taught Elsie to darn stockings by the stove. Martha Hale taught school on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the front room of the ranch house for the 5 children of the nearest farms, and by January, she had a waiting list of 7 more students. Mrs. Evelyn kept the books for the Tate Ranch, for the Bartlett Sheriff's Office, for the Cedar Ridge General Store, and for 3 of the surrounding ranches, and nobody in Bighorn County did mathematics she did not approve of anymore. In the spring of '87, the Wyatt Tate Memorial School opened in Cedar Ridge. Martha Hale was the first teacher. The building had been paid for with Wyatt's $1,840, plus matching funds from the Tate Ranch, plus a contribution from Judge Arthur Miller's personal account, plus labor donated by every able-bodied man within 20 miles, including Sheriff Thomas Bartlett, who hammered nails for 3 straight Saturdays without pay. Above the schoolhouse door was a carved wooden plaque that said, Wyatt Tate Memorial School 1887. He laughed much and loved more than he was loved back. The day it opened, Noah Hale, now 10 years old, played the harmonica at the dedication. He played Amazing Grace. He had been practicing it for 7 months. He did not miss a note. Jasper Tate, 34 years old, had begun that spring to pay calls on a new school teacher who had come out from Minnesota to help Martha with the older children. Her name was Emily Carson. She was 28, tall, quiet, and had a laugh like a small bell. Jasper, who had not looked at a woman in the eye for more than 2 seconds in 5 years, found himself walking the long way back from the schoolhouse to the ranch just to have the excuse of stopping by her boarding house to see if she needed any wood split. In June, he asked her to marry him. In August, they were married in the same small white church where Elias and Ruth had been married 2 years before. Sheriff Thomas Bartlett was nominated by Judge Miller for the position of territorial marshal in the reorganization that followed the Hargrove trial. He accepted. He served with distinction for the next 11 years. He kept his father's old sergeant stripes in his desk drawer the whole time. And Ruth Tate, in the spring of '87, began to walk differently. It was not something anyone spoke of at first. A pregnancy on a frontier ranch was private business mentioned only when it was certain. But by May, Mrs. Agnes had begun to make the bread in larger batches without explanation, and by June, Martha Hale had begun to hum old lullabies while she graded spelling tests. And by July, Elsie Hale had taken to walking beside Ruth wherever Ruth walked, with her small hand resting on Ruth's growing side as if she were carrying something precious herself. On a morning in late September, the first morning of the year that smelled of autumn, Elias Tate walked out of the ranch house and around to the oak tree. His right sleeve was rolled up. He sat on the stone bench his father had carved 30 years before, and he looked at the oak, and he looked at the 4 graves now under it, and he looked at his own right forearm. The tattoo there was an oak tree. He had gotten it during his Army days from a Prussian corporal in Fort Laramie who had taught himself the craft in Hamburg as a boy. Beneath the tree over the years, he had added names. Hannah had been added in the spring of 1884. Samuel had been added the same spring a week later because the first week he could not bring himself to write the name. Colonel James Tate had been added in 1880 before the others. It had been there longest. It was almost faded now. Wyatt had been added the week after Wyatt's funeral by the same Prussian corporal, now an old man in Cheyenne. Below those 4 names, there was still room on Elias Tate's arm. Below Wyatt, there was a clean, bare space about 2 inches high. Ruth came out of the house. She saw him there. She walked over. She sat down beside him on the stone bench. She was very round now. It was the 7th month, and it was clear to everyone, including her, that she was carrying a boy. She followed his gaze to his arm. You are looking at the blank space, she said. Yes, Ruth. You are thinking about what name goes there. Yes, Ruth. Elias. Yes. It will be Wyatt. I know it will be Wyatt. But underneath Wyatt someday, if the Lord is gracious, there will be other names. Children's names, grandchildren's names, because I did not come this far so that only one name goes beneath our Wyatt on your arm. Do you hear me, Mr. Tate? He looked at her. The morning sun was on her face. Her eyes were steady. I hear you, Mrs. Tate. She took his hand. She laid it on her belly. The child inside kicked once a small, firm kick right against the palm of his hand. He closed his hand over hers. Ruth. Yes. 3 years ago, I would have told you that the Lord had forgotten me. I would have told you that my life ended in a bedroom in the winter of '84. I would have told you that a man only gets one chance at a family, and mine was under that oak tree in a row. I know you would have, Mr. Tate. I was wrong about all of it. Yes, Mr. Tate. The Lord did not forget. He was only waiting until a young woman stepped off a train in a place called Laramie and did not walk past a family she did not know. That is what he was waiting for. He was waiting for you, Ruth. Ruth laid her head on his shoulder. They sat that way a long time. Somewhere up in the branches of the oak tree, a meadowlark began to sing. Ruth closed her eyes. Elias. Yes, I can hear them. All of them. Hannah and Samuel and the Colonel and Wyatt. I can hear them singing too. Ruth, I hear them. They are happy. Yes, Ruth, they are happy. Elias Tate, former cavalry sergeant, former Stone, former man who had told himself for 3 years that his arrangement with grief suited him fine, sat on a stone bench under the oldest oak in the state of Wyoming, with his wife's head on his shoulder and his unborn son moving under his palm. The meadowlark sang in the branches. The wind moved in the pines. The smoke from the ranch house chimney went up straight into a clear blue September sky. And for the first time in a very long time, Elias Tate understood that the arrangement of his life was not after all a matter of what had been taken from him. It was a matter of what had been given. He had been given a woman who would not walk past a family she did not know. He had been given 2 brothers, one of whom had given his life to save a 9-year-old boy, and one of whom had ridden 180 miles without sleeping to bring the law. He had been given a housekeeper who had raised him and who would, God willing, raise his son. He had been given a family that had not existed a year and a half ago, and that now filled every room in a house he had once walked through alone. He had been given a second chance, and he had not walked past it. Far below in the valley, the creek caught the morning light and threw it back as a long ribbon of silver. The road where Ruth had first come walking was empty now, no wagon on it, no weary woman pulling with bleeding shoulders, only the dust of a quiet Wyoming morning and the long shadow of the oak tree on the grass, and very faintly the sound of a little girl laughing somewhere inside the ranch house, and a meadowlark in a branch, in the slow, steady heartbeat of a woman against a man's arm. The Tate brothers had gone to a station to meet a bride. The bride had never arrived on the train. She had arrived on foot, in the rain, on her knees, with the weight of 4 strangers on her bleeding back, and she had not let any of them go. And that in the end was why she was theirs.